Hey folks, welcome back. Someone on my channel asked me to do a guide on dpMeter5 and I want to do this with this video. So it's a loudness measurement precision meter. It's also a gain staging tool because you can change the loudness automatically, and I want to show you how I use it and why you should use it too, because it's completely free and it's resizable, which is nice to have. So here, this dpMeter is on the master on this track you can listen to in the background. And I want to give you some ideas what you can do within this plugin. So first we have different modes. We have three modes: the RMS mode, EBU mode, and dial mode here. So first I start with RMS because it's the oldest kind of method of measuring loudness, and a lot of people are still familiar with it. Even though EBU is much better, I want to start with RMS because it's kind of the same thing, and it also explains why we have EBU now instead of RMS. So with RMS here, we have multiple levels here. You can see that. Maybe hit play. And we have also some settings here at the top. So at first we have here an RMS integrated value, which calculates basically the average level of the peaks. So when we have audio material, we can see here down here in the oscilloscope, maybe unfreeze this, you can see here we have peaks, right? Which means we can measure these in values. And if you then take all these peaks, all the values of these peaks, all the loudness of these peaks, and measure them over the whole track from start to finish, and then take these values and calculate the average value of these, you get this number. And this tells you basically the integrated RMS loudness level of your whole track. And you have to play back the whole track from start to finish. That's the idea about it. So then we have RMS momentary, which does the same thing. It calculates or takes the peaks, the loudness of the peaks, and calculates an average value out of it. But here it takes a time window, and we can change the time window here at the top right. It's at the moment 600 milliseconds. And you take basically the time frame, or let's look here down at the oscilloscope again on the right side. You can see we have here some kind of window, right? In this window we have multiple peaks fitting at one time. And we can also change the window timing. So when we click on oscilloscope here and change the pitch here, or the key follow, you can see now we have multiple or more peaks in this window. The window still moves across our track, but the window is bigger, right? So this is basically what this number here does. So we take a time frame of 600 milliseconds, take all these peaks and calculate the average value. And this is what you see here. And you can change this RMS timing here with the RMS mode, which is important maybe if you want to compare this value to some kind of other meters. Maybe you have a limiter. And because RMS is not standardized, every kind of limiter that has an analyzer in it, or every analyzer out there uses kind of a different value for this. Some have 400 milliseconds, some have 500, you know. So it differs from plugin to plugin. So you can change this here to have a number you can compare to other meter plugins or limiter plugins or compressor plugins or whatever. Okay, so this is the average loudness of your track, your momentary average loudness of your track measured within a time frame. Then we have here the RMS momentary max, which is just a value that remembers the last highest number you hit with this meter. So if you hit here maybe -6, then this one changes here to -6 and stays there until you hit a higher number. So it just remembers for you the highest loudness level you hit playing here on your track. And this never reset. If you want to reset this, you have to click down here on reset, right? So now it measures again, and it remembers the last highest value is here 8.1. You can see reach sometimes higher numbers. Okay. So also you have to know is that the number here the lower the number is, the louder something is. So when you reach your -0, then you do something wrong, because then you have some kind of brick. Okay, so these numbers are pretty important for you, because you can remember certain type of numbers and then recall them in your memory basically, and see if something is too loud or too quiet. You basically build up some kind of reference number table in your brain. At least that's how it works for me. I can remember certain numbers here and can tell instantly, for this track, -7 is maybe too loud. Okay, I want to go quieter, maybe -10. So you can remember these numbers and then you can act on it. Okay, so the top part here is completely average level. So it's taking the peaks, calculating the average level over certain distances. Here it's the whole track, here it's a time frame, and this remembers the highest number you hit here with the RMS momentary level. Down here we have the maximum peak, which is basically, when you can see here all these peaks peaking, right? And it takes basically the maximum peak it's measured so far, right? So if you have only lower things and then later in your track you have one snare that peaks out too much, it basically remembers exactly the snare because it's the loudest peak in your track, and it stays there until it sees something that hit higher. On the master here, it doesn't make any sense so far because I have this metering plugin here. You can see after my clipper here. So you see basically the ceiling clipping setting. I clip everything that's that goes above -0.3. So of course the maximum peak is -0.3 dBFS, because that's my clipper setting, of course. Right, so it doesn't make really sense here to read that here. Maybe you want to use this in front of the peaker, of the clipper or of the limiter to measuring something. Then we have here true peak max, which is basically the same as peak, but this one here is the true peak. So what's true peak now? So it's a bit hard to explain with words, so I'm going here to my drawing setting. So when you have waveforms, right? A waveform looks like this, probably. And when you play this on a speaker, you have maybe a 1 peak, something like this. And you have then some kind of clipper in there. So you clip everything here at this level, -0.3, right? That's what we do. So we clip everything at this level. And this is here basically or this line is basically this here, this -0.3, right? This is where we cut. But the true peak is basically what you play on your speakers, because you have a speaker, and the speaker has a speaker cone. So we clip here. The speaker has a speaker cone, and it's, of course, in the real world. In the real world, nothing really acts like this. It doesn't work in the real world like this. So the speaker cone has to make these movements, moving basically in and out. And because it's a real physical object, it doesn't move like that. It still swings like this, right? The speaker goes out, and then here you cut, and then it still swings out, and then it swings back in from your speaker. So you have in the real world basically still a small thing that peaks over what you actually dialed in with your clipper. I hope I make this, explain this pretty clear. So what you cut in the digital domain is not what you get in the real world, because the speaker cone has to still move in and out and still swings a bit more in and out than you want to have it in your digital domain. So here is basically what you get in the real world. So you peak with your speaker cone over 0 dB by 2.1 dB in the real world. So we can calculate this basically in. So when you play this back maybe on a real speaker, you maybe discover some distortion. But for me, it never made any real difference to actually, you know, peak over 0 dB. So I usually completely ignore that. But you can still go to the master here and can say, oh, I'm actually peaking here with 2 dB. So I'm going minus 2 dB, minus 2, right? And everything is good again. So that's something you can do. So that's just for you to know what this is. So this is what your speaker cone or what your speaker actually does in the real world as a peak, as a maximum peak. So then we have here the crest or the crest factor, and it gives you a rough idea how compressed your material is. It gives you the distance or the difference between the RMS level, what you measure probably here, the RMS momentary level, the distance between the RMS level here and the highest peak. Okay, so this is the difference, what's in between there. So when you compress this, of course, the distance closes or gets smaller. You have more compressed material. You can see here, or you can read basically, if your material needs more compression or no, or it's maybe too less or maybe too much, right? You can decide on this number. Like I said, you have to build some kind of table in your head for certain numbers, for certain type of genres or music you produce. You can remember certain type of numbers and then you recall it and can act on it and can say, well, I need more compression here, or I need less compression to something. And it's not really helpful only on the master. You can also put this on buses, for instance, the drum bus, right? This is what I do usually, and I can decide then if my drum bus actually needs more compression or maybe it has already too much compression. And this becomes important later on when you do albums or multiple tracks and you want to stay consistent with the loudness, because how loud the drums are in your mixdown is pretty important for the overall perceived loudness of the track or how consistent something sounds, right? You probably know the problem here. You make multiple tracks and then you listen to all these tracks and all these tracks sound completely different, even though we have all the same frequency balance, all the same loudness, but they sound completely different because in this one, the drums have different energy than the drums in another track. And you can use this here on the drum bus to basically even out a bit more the drum bus on certain type of tracks to get more consistency in all of these tracks combined. So then we have here basically explained all of this. We have here some configs we can use, left, right, 4-channel, 6-channel. If you have multiple speakers, you probably also only use stereo. That's at least what I use all the time, because who does have 6 speakers, right, normally? But you can change this here if you want to. Then we have the gain setting, so you can amplify here the signal. You can say I want to have everything minus 5 dB, right? So it turns down, so it's also a gain knob, so you can change the volume. You can also change it back to 0. And you can dial in here a reference level, okay? So this is now something I use all the time. So you can say, well, let's say integrated. We have an integrated value of minus 10, but I want to have my track, instead of minus 10, I want to have it at minus 18 or maybe minus 14. So dial in minus 14 and then you click on this M button, match loudness. And now it calculates basically the value here, the gain. So we need to reduce the overall volume by minus 3.7 dB to reach with the RMS integrated level minus 14, right? So you can see now we have here integrated value of minus 14. So you can use this basically as a gain staging tool to match all your audio levels to a reference level you dial in here, right? So this is very handy. Okay, maybe bring this back to 0 dB, reset everything. And I also want to change this mode now to EBU, because EBU is the real deal. That's something I use all the time. I don't use RMS. And you can see the difference between RMS and EBU is that we don't have here the time frame and the filter, because that's standardized in the EPU standard. That's pretty important to know, because now everything is more clean or clear to communicate, right? You can say to your friend, well, this should have -12 short-term loudness, and he doesn't need to know the time window, the RMS window, and he doesn't need to know the weighting filter. He just knows I need to EPU standard, and I look for the short-term loudness, and then I need to see this number, then it's right. So we have now here, instead of average level and peak level, like we had here on RMS, we have now here integrated loudness, which is the same as RMS integrated. It's measured across the whole track. So you have to play the whole track from start to finish. And then you can read the number here, and you can say, this is the loudness of my track, the integrated loudness. Then we have short-term here, and short-term max, momentary and momentary max, true peak, and loudness range. So this one here is a bit different, because short-term is a different time frame than momentary. So this is the standard, basically. It standardizes the measuring windows, right, with certain terms. Integrated is the whole track. Short term is, I think, 3 seconds, a time window of 3 seconds, and momentary is 400 milliseconds measuring window, right? So it changes, like I showed you before with RMS here, it changes basically the time frame of the measuring window. And then these max values here basically remember the last highest peak we hit with these numbers in front here. So these change all the time. They basically reset, and these max values here never reset. They always remember the last highest value. Also here with the true peak max, it's the same. It's basically like I said before with the speaker cone, it's the real world true peak maximum value. And you can see here in EPU there's no peak. It's always true peak. So they completely scrapped this whole thing here, concept of having a peak, and completely replaced it only with a true peak, because that's what is important about your production, right? How it sounds in the real world. So we also have a loudness range here. Instead of crest, we have loudness range. It's also kind of a different number, and you can read also here, or you can remember these numbers and can read if your material is already compressed too much or not enough. So there's also a lot of numbers you have to remember. Also important to know for EPU is that in these numbers are also integrated the frequency balance. So having a sine tone at 30 Hertz, which is a super low sub bass, and blowing this up to 0 dB gives you a different number on here than having a sine tone at 1 kilohertz and going up to 0 dB. It gives you a different number, because different frequencies should be differently weighted, because our ears are not perceiving loudness linearly, right? So there's a certain curve, a Fletcher-Munson curve probably, to our ear perception. So this is also integrated in these numbers. So it's not only based on peaks. On peak values, there's also a frequency curve integrated. So this is why you should use EPU, because it's much better. There are more things integrated in this unit than just using RMS with peaks and so on. So like I said, it's the frequencies are also integrated into this. Also here you have these match buttons. So you can say, well, this is a drum bass tune, right? So I want to have this here -10. This is my number for this kind of chill out, liquid kind of old school jungle. Maybe -10 is way too loud. Maybe -12 would be nice to have. And then you can click here, or I use most of the time the short-term loudness max. So I play a certain amount of time here. You can see, oh, it stays here on -10, right? So I click this, and I need to reduce here this by -0.4 LUFS to reach -12 LUFS. So this is what I said. with these numbers, I know exactly my numbers. So for jungle, I want to have -12, for ambient maybe -14. For drum bass neurofunk, you want to have -6. It's super loud. And yeah, you can remember these numbers and can act on it. What else do we have here? We have also channel config, so 5.1 if you have a multiple speaker setup, but usually you want to have it here, it's 2.1 because you have 2 speakers left and right, a stereo setup. That's what you want to use. And yeah, I want to show you also the Wikipedia page here. This is EBU R128, that's the standard, this is how it calls. There's also some text here why it's invented and how it's used. We have also explained here the loudness units, what they actually measure through peak. And then here's metering, what you explained to your momentary M, using a sliding time window of 400 milliseconds. So momentary is down here, momentary loudness is 400 milliseconds. Short term is 3 seconds. And then we have integrated averaging the program from start to finish, describes the loudness of the whole track or program, right? So it's when you measure from the start to the finish, you get an integrated loudness unit you can communicate to whatever, your client or your friend, whatever. Okay, so this is the Wikipedia page, it's also linked in the description below if you read about this. And yeah, this is basically how I use it. And if you use it more and more in everyday life, you remember certain numbers and you can read or can see instantaneously if something is wrong or if something needs more compression or if you overstep the line on certain buses or on the master itself, right? And I also want to give you here an idea about drums. So here I have the drum bus, right? And let's say I remove this here. I measure this, reset. And then after this, I use a clipper. So everything above 0 dB is clipped by this clipper, right? Everything I step over the line here. So maybe remove this. You can see we're peaking here with 1 dB, 3 dB over 0 dB. Switch this on. So now we clip everything. So it never goes over 0 dB, right? So we clip everything at 0 dB. So now having this dpMeter now in front of the clipper, measuring everything. And I know exactly that my drums should be -12 LUFS, short term max. You can see it's already here -11.3, so it's not that far off, right? But I still want to have these drums loudness-wise -12, so I hit M here. And now I reduce the volume, the gain, by -0.8 to reach 12 LUFS, okay? And then I just use the clipper after that to clip everything that peaks over 0 dB. And what I get now is a perfectly nice, balanced -12 dB loud drum mix down. When I remove here the clipper, you can see I'm still peaking here a bit. Because the loudness doesn't say anything about the peaks, it's more about the average value, right? And we increase the loudness basically based on this average value, and then everything that peaks above 0 dB gets cut here with the clipper. So now my material is not peaking over 0 dB, and it's also -12 short-term loudness LU loud, which is super handy to have. And I do this all the time on certain type of tracks, or at least on drum tracks most of the time, to reach certain levels in my mixdown. So here we have the music bus, right? It's only pads on there and some sounds. Put the dpMeter there. You can measure this. You can then say maybe, oh, this should be maybe -16 loud. And then everything that peaks above 0 dB is caught by this clipper here. So now we match this here, right? So we increase everything by 2.8 dB. So we reach now -16. And if you do this on all your kind of tracks, right? You say, oh, pads and lead sounds that kind of is all the same thing, right? In multiple tracks, you want to have something around -60 LUFS. The drum bass should be always around -12 LUFS, something like this. The bass is something around, I don't know, depends. And then you basically get the same mix down, the same rough mix down consistency on all your tracks across the board. So this is how I use it basically to get consistency with my mix down. Yeah, that's how I use it. So I already explained for 26 minutes now. Okay, I hope I made this clear how this works. The last thing I can explain here is the dial mode, because this one is completely irrelevant probably for you, because dial stands for dialogue, and it's mostly used in probably in cinema. The dial norm, there's also a link in the description below. Dial norm is the metadata parameter that controls playback gain within the Dolby laboratories, and it's yeah, dial norm stands for dialogue normalization, so it's for talking stuff in movie films or in podcasts probably. So it's the same here. It's if you remember certain numbers, you can act on it, but all you have to know is that this is basically the same as RMS, kind of, but with the standard, basically with the standard in mind. Some things are standardized. What exactly, I have no idea. I never used the dial mode here, to be honest. I have no idea what all these numbers are for, but you can see it's specialized here for dialogue percentage. I don't know how this is measured. So it's a different mode of measuring something. So what you want to use as a music producer is probably the EBU mode. It's the best mode we have. Forget about RMS, forget about VU meters or stuff like this. Always use EBU. That's the most modern measuring method you can use so far. And it's very handy for me, at least. Also, this plugin is completely free, and it works very well. A link is in the description below, and I use it all the time. It's yeah, it's the best gain knob I have. Like I showed you with the reference level and so on. It's pretty handy. What else is there to explain? I think that's it. Yeah, here in Bitwig I used some buttons, as you can see. I'm using here the reset button, which is linked to this reset button here, and also this match TP here I'm using, which is this button here. So that's because I don't want to open up the plugin every time I want to hit this M button. I can use just the buttons by Bitwig and do it this way. So I'm basically going in here, play the track, reset it, and then play back a different amount of time, and then I hit match, right? And then I have exactly my -12 here I dialed in, right? Oh yeah, right. I'm also using this dpMeter here compared with the crossover. I also made a video about the crossover, which is basically just a band splitter, a clean band splitter. And in Bitwig here, you can use this VST and put in these bands, band 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's always a dpMeter in here, right? So maybe reset this here and use a new crossover. Just remove this crossover. So I'm measuring the loudness with the dpMeter on all of these bands. like here on band 2. And I have a reference level here of -0, okay? But when I use here this button, match TP, I'm matching basically here I think I'm matching the true peak maximum. So I want to have a true peak of 0 here on all of these bands. So basically what I do is I normalize to a peak level all of these bands. So all of these bands should peak at 0 dB. That's what I want to have. And when I push now this button, you can hear it sounds much cleaner. So all of these bands are basically now peak normalized, which gives a nice clean balance to all of these bands. And please don't tell any mixing engineer what I do here, but it sounds so good to me. It's so easy for me to use. And yeah, so when I have this value basically of true peak of 0 on all of these bands, also on all of these bands there's a clipper. You can see I have the clip here at -20%, so I basically turn down the input volume of these clippers so I don't clip anything on these bands. I just want to balance out basically the frequency balance with this. But now I can increase the input gain of these clippers on all of these bands at the same time. So I drive basically all of these bands equally into a clipper on all of these bands. So with this method I can squeeze out a lot of loudness. I can see here it's -7, okay. -6. You can go very far with this and reach, you can see it's almost a brick. And it sounds still, yeah, it's not clean, but you know, it's not super distorted. But because the balance, the frequency balance is there, you get away with this. Instead of having this unbalanced and then using a clipper over the whole frequency, right? You don't get away with this because the bass is of course distorting first. But here we have a frequency balance in there. But I made a video about this. There's a different video explaining how I do this. There's also a link in the description. So yeah, I would just want to give you a small rundown about the dpMeter, how I use it and how you can use it, and I hope it helped a bit. Thanks for watching. See you next time.